The vast silence of space stretched endlessly outside the viewport, broken only by the faint shimmer of distant stars. Captain Elias Monroe sat with his arms folded across his chest, his reflection staring back at him from the glass. His uniform was wrinkled, his expression tired, but his eyes carried the spark of someone who had already decided he wasn't going to play this game by anyone's rules but his own. The Zetherians had summoned him. Well, technically they had captured him. First, then declared that he was now an honored guest of the throne. The chains around his wrists and the two guards with electrified spears at his back made it clear how much of an honor it truly was. Still, Elias walked with his head high, smirking faintly as if the whole thing were just a bad comedy he had wandered into. The guards marched him through towering metal corridors, their walls etched with sharp geometric patterns that glowed faintly with a cold blue light. The air was heavy, thick with some metallic tang that burned the back of his throat. Elias coughed once, then muttered just loud enough for his escorts to hear. "Beautiful place you've got here. I'd rate it 4 stars on the Interstellar Travel Guide. Lose the chains and you might even get 5. The guards hissed, their reptilian faces twisting into expressions of disgust. One jabbed him in the ribs with the butt of a spear, but Elias only grinned wider. Pain was temporary. Making them angry was priceless. At last, the grand doors of the throne room slid open. The chamber beyond was enormous, carved into a cavernous hall lit by massive torches of green flame. The floor was polished black stone, reflective enough to make every step shimmer. At the far end of the hall sat the queen of the Zetherians. Sarathis was colossal, nearly twice the height of Elias, with scaled skin that gleamed like obsidian under the flames. A crown of bone and crystal curved backward from her head, giving her the air of a predator who had simply decorated herself with the remains of her enemies. Her eyes, sharp and luminous, fixed on the human with a predatory focus. The courtiers gathered along the sides whispered among themselves, their voices like rustling leaves. Humans were new to them, untested, unmeasured. Some expected Elias to beg for mercy. Others thought he might tremble, cry, or at least keep silent. Instead, Elias tilted his head back, studied the massive throne, and let out a low whistle. "You know," he said conversationally, "I've seen a lot of fancy chairs, but that one screams lower back pain. You ever thought about cushions?" The hall went silent. Dozens of alien eyes widened in shock. No one spoke to their queen that way. Sarathis narrowed her eyes, leaning forward slowly, her claws tapping against the armrest of her throne. "You dare mock me, human." Her voice rolled like thunder, deep and sharp, making the air itself vibrate. Elias met her gaze without flinching. Not mocking, just making an observation. Comfort matters even for royalty. You can't rule the galaxy if you've got a sore spine. Gasps echoed through the hall. One courtier hissed something about execution. Another muttered about insolence. The guards behind Elias tensed, ready to strike him down at a single command. But Sarathis did not speak. She stared at him, silent, as though trying to decide whether he was a fool or something far more dangerous. Finally, she rose from her throne. The room seemed to shrink as she descended the steps, each movement carrying the weight of a predator stalking its prey. She stopped before Elias, towering over him so completely that his head barely reached her chest. Her breath smelled faintly of ash and ozone as she lowered her face to his level. "You are not afraid?" she asked, her voice softer now but laced with menace. Elias tilted his head, lips twitching into the kind of grin that had gotten him into fights at bars back on Earth. "Oh, I'm terrified. But what's the point of being scared if you can't laugh about it?" The queen's eyes narrowed, her claws extended, razor sharp, hovering just inches from his cheek. The guards leaned forward, anticipating blood. Instead, Sarathis studied him with a strange intensity, as if he were some rare animal she had never seen before. "You are a curious creature," she said slowly. "Most beings bow before me. They break, they grovel, they cry, but you—" She paused, her mouth curling into something that might have been a smile, though it was hard to tell on a face built for intimidation. "You jest." Elias shrugged, though the chains clinked against his wrists. It's what we humans do. Laugh in the dark, crack jokes when we should be screaming, drives our enemies crazy, seems to be working on you. The courtiers hissed again, some in outrage, others in confusion. Never before had someone spoken to their queen this way and survived. But Sarathis raised a hand, silencing them. Her gaze remained locked on Elias, studying every flicker of expression. "You intrigue me, human," she said at last. "Perhaps I will not kill you yet." Elias grinned wider, though he kept his tone casual. "Good call. I tend to make an impression when I'm alive. Much harder to do that when I'm dead." For the first time in years, a sound escaped. Sarathis's throat that was not a command, not a roar, not a growl of war. It was low, brief, almost reluctant, but it was a laugh. The courtiers froze in shock. Their queen never laughed. The moment passed quickly, and Sarathis straightened, her expression returning to its cold, regal mask. She gestured sharply, and the guards shoved Elias to his knees. "You will remain in my custody," she declared, her voice echoing through the chamber. "You will answer my questions. You will entertain me with your insolence. And perhaps if you survive my patience, I will decide what use a creature like you may have." The chains bit into Elias's skin, but he lifted his head, eyes gleaming with mischief. "Well, Your Majesty, I've always been good at entertaining audiences. Just wait till you hear my jokes about lizard people." The court erupted in outrage, but Sarathis only stared at him with that same strange, unreadable expression. There was fury there, yes, but also something else. Something that kept her from giving the order to silence him forever. As the guards dragged him away toward the cells, Elias glanced back over his shoulder, still grinning. For the briefest moment he thought he saw it again. The tiniest hint of amusement on the queen's face, quickly buried beneath her cold mask of power. And though the chains were heavy, Elias Munro walked with the lightness of a man who had just discovered something priceless. For all her power, for all her menace, the queen of the Zitherians could laugh. Elias woke to a chill that bit through his thin prison garb. The cell was dark, the walls smooth and cold, and the only light came from faint cracks near the ceiling that glimmered like distant stars. His chains rattled as he shifted, but he refused to let them dampen his mood. In fact, he smiled. The first thing he noticed was the silence, not the ordinary silence of an empty room, but a deliberate, tense hush, the kind that made every movement feel louder than it really was. The silence was waiting for him to break it. He hadn't been in the cell for long before the sound of heavy, measured footsteps echoed down the corridor outside. A shadow appeared at the edge of the light, and he knew immediately who it was. Sarathis, the Zytherian queen, was coming. The door hissed open, swinging wide to reveal her towering figure. She moved like a predator, each step controlled and deliberate. Her scaled skin shimmered under the faint light, and the bone-like crown on her head caught a glimmer that made it seem almost alive. Elias raised an eyebrow. "Well, well," he said, letting his voice echo slightly. "Look who decided to visit. You get off work early today?" Sarathis ignored the jest and leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Her eyes studied him, sharp and piercing, trying to measure his strength, his courage, perhaps even his sanity. "You have spirit," she said, her voice low and careful, a tone rarely heard from her. "Most humans would break after one day. You have been here 3, and you still mock me." Elias leaned back, letting the chains clink softly. "Spirit, huh? I like that. Sounds fancy. You can call it spirit. I call it not dying of boredom." Sarathis narrowed her eyes. "You are unwise, human. Insolence will not save you." "Maybe not," Elias replied easily, "but it hasn't killed me yet either. That's a start, right?" The queen's expression flickered just for a moment. Amusement? Frustration? It was hard to tell. Elias had a feeling that no one had ever spoken to her this way and lived. And yet, here he was. She stepped closer, her claws tapping the floor. "Why do you laugh? Why do you not tremble? Do humans have no fear?" "Fear is natural," Elias said, tilting his head. But letting it rule you? That's for species who think screaming helps. Laughing helps, oddly enough. Trust me, works every time. Sarathis watched him, silent for several long seconds. Her gaze seemed to burn into him, trying to read every thought, every hidden motive. Elias grinned, enjoying the game. You are not like the others, she said finally. They come to me, terrified. They bow, they apologize before speaking. You face me as an equal, or perhaps as a fool. Elias shrugged. Maybe a little of both. You ever consider that? Maybe I'm just a fool, with really good timing. Sarathis took another step, and Elias noticed how her presence filled the room like a storm cloud. Her eyes flicked to the chains, and for a moment he thought she might snap them open. But instead, she did something unexpected. She sat on the edge of the doorway, lowering herself to his level, still towering, but closer than he expected. You are bold, she said. You speak to me without fear, without respect. That is dangerous, dangerous to you. Dangerous to others who might follow your example. And yet, Elias said lightly, you keep me alive. That's even more dangerous, don't you think? Sarathis's gaze lingered on him, unblinking. For the first time, she seemed uncertain, almost curious. Humans were strange creatures, unpredictable, uncontainable. They fought not only with strength, but with heart, with courage, and with laughter. Elias embodied everything she had been trained to dismiss as weakness, and yet it made him stronger in ways she could not yet measure. You are perplexing, she admitted. No other being has faced me with such irreverence and survived. Perplexing is good, Elias said. It's fashionable these days. Makes life more interesting. Don't you want life to be interesting? Sarathis paused. Her claws drummed lightly against the floor as she considered him. She had ruled through fear for decades, and yet here was a small human who refused to bend, who laughed in the face of threats, who smiled even in chains. And with every moment, Elias chipped away at the invisible wall she had built around her, throne and her people. The queen's lips twitched almost imperceptibly. A smile? Perhaps. She straightened again, standing like the towering monarch she was, her voice carrying authority. Tomorrow, you will answer my questions. For now, leave me. Elias smirked. Sure, Your Majesty, but don't think this is over. I have plenty more jokes where these came from. After she left, the chains felt heavier but not burdensome. Other prisoners watched him with wide eyes, whispering to each other. No human had ever spoken so boldly to the queen. Some shook their heads, fearing what would come next. Others whispered admiration, quietly inspired by his fearlessness. Elias smiled to himself. Being brave wasn't about never being afraid. It was about controlling fear, using it, bending it to your will. And as long as he kept laughing, no one, not even the queen, could take that from him. The next day, Sarathis summoned him again. This time the queen's chambers were larger, filled with alien artifacts, glowing crystals, and towering banners that celebrated centuries of conquest. She sat on her throne, observing him silently. You amuse me, she said. But amusement alone will not ensure survival. Tell me, human, why do you resist? Elias leaned forward, chains clinking softly. Because someone has to. Because I believe there's always a better way. Fear doesn't solve problems. It just makes them bigger. And maybe because I like to see the mighty get a little embarrassed sometimes. Sarathis tilted her head. Embarrassment is insignificant. Power is everything. Maybe for some species, Elias said. But humans? We've learned that power is nothing without loyalty, respect, and a little bit of humor. That's how we survive. The queen's eyes narrowed. Her claws flexed, then relaxed. You speak as if you are clever, yet you are bound in chains. And yet, Elias said, I am clever enough to be here, still breathing, still talking, and still laughing. That's more clever than most, isn't it? The courtiers whispered, some in awe, some in fear. Sarathis watched him with a careful, calculating gaze. She had never considered that survival might come from something as simple as courage and humor, rather than brute strength or fear. "You are unlike any human I have studied," she said finally, "and perhaps unlike any creature I have encountered. Your defiance is entertaining if dangerous. I will continue this experiment. You will remain in my presence, answer my questions, and continue to amuse me." Elias smiled. "I aim to, please. And just so you know, Your Majesty, I don't mind the experiments. I find the company quite lively." The Queen's lips twitched again, almost a smile. She rose, towering above him once more, and gestured for the guards to take him back. As he was dragged away, Elias caught sight of her eyes lingering on him for a long moment. There was curiosity there, something dangerous and unspoken. She was trying to understand him, trying to predict him, but Elias had learned long ago that humans were impossible to predict. Back in the cell, other prisoners gathered around, whispering in awe. "Did you hear him?" one murmured. "He spoke to the Queen as if she were a person." Elias shrugged. "Well, she is a person," he said lightly. "Just a really big, scary one with a taste for dramatic entrances." He spent the night thinking. He had learned something important in just 2 days of captivity. Fear was temporary. Courage lasted. Humor lasted. And the ability to inspire others, if only by refusing to give in, could be stronger than any weapon, stronger than any army. When the sun, or what passed for a sun in the alien sky, rose, Elias was ready. He would face Sarathis again, not as a prisoner, not as a victim, but as a human who had already begun to change the game. And somewhere deep in the Queen's mind, that thought had begun to take root as well. The air in the Zetherian prison was heavy with despair. Unlike the human cells back on Earth, these quarters were cold, metallic, and suffocating. Prisoners sat silently on the hard stone floor, their scaled bodies rigid with fear and caution. They had learned long ago that any hint of defiance invited punishment, often harsh and irreversible. Yet Elias Monroe moved among them like a strange, bright flame that refused to be dimmed. He had spent the morning stretching, his muscles stiff from the previous day's limited movement. The chains clinked faintly as he rose, but he refused to let them remind him of his confinement. Instead, he turned toward the other prisoners, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "You know," he said casually, "I'm starting to think this place is missing one thing." The prisoners looked at him warily, some tilting their heads in curiosity, others narrowing their eyes. Elias's reputation had spread quickly. No human had ever dared speak to the Queen as he did, and yet here he was, alive, joking, and smiling, as if nothing could touch him. "What's that?" one of the smaller Zetherians asked, his voice trembling. "Hope," Elias said simply. "We don't get a lot of it in places like this, but I think we can find some." A ripple of disbelief ran through the group. "Hope? In a prison ruled by fear?" One of the older Zetherians scoffed. "You have no idea what you're talking about, human. Hope dies quickly here. We live by obedience, by fear, by survival." Elias leaned against the cold wall, chains rattling softly. "Maybe. But I've seen humans survive worse, and sometimes all it takes is a little belief, a little courage, and yeah, a little humor. Makes the chains feel lighter." The prisoners exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. Most had never spoken so openly, and fewer still had heard anyone treat despair lightly. Elias's confidence was infectious, and even though they were wary, they found themselves listening. Hours passed, and the Queen did not summon him. That was unusual. Elias used the time to talk quietly with the other prisoners, sharing stories of Earth, of small victories, of ordinary humans doing extraordinary things. He spoke of moments when people stood up despite fear, when laughter carried them through impossible situations, when even a single act of kindness could ripple outward like a wave. By the time the first dim light of the alien sky filtered through the cell vents, a subtle change had occurred. The prisoners moved with slightly less stiffness, their eyes brighter, their postures less submissive. They were not free, not yet. But Elias had planted a seed. The queen arrived shortly after dawn. She did not announce herself. Her presence was like the sudden drop of temperature before a storm. The prisoners fell silent immediately, every scale and claw tense with fear. Elias, however, simply smiled. "Good morning, Your Majesty," he said cheerfully. "I hope you slept well. I had the strangest dream last night. You were in it." Sarathis raised an eyebrow. "Do not speak to me as if you are equal to me. You are still my prisoner. Your amusement will not save you from punishment." "True," Elias said lightly, "but it keeps me sane, which is important. You don't want me going mad, do you? That would be messy." The queen stepped closer, her gaze sweeping over the prisoners who now dared to glance at her without immediate fear. She noticed small shifts in posture, hesitant gestures that suggested cautious curiosity rather than complete obedience. Elias had done something unexpected. He had made them question even slightly the absolute nature of their terror. "You are bold, human," Sarathis said. "You speak to me as if chains do not bind you. You influence others with your words. That is dangerous." "Dangerous is fun," Elias said with a grin. "But careful, Your Majesty. I don't want to get you in trouble." Yet again, the queen's lips twitched. That fleeting motion, almost a smile, unsettled the courtiers behind her. It was rare to see her react to anyone's humor at all, let alone that of a human prisoner. Sarathis turned back to Elias. "You have a strange influence over them," she said. "They are not yet free, yet they look at you differently." "Why?" Elias shrugged. "Humans have a thing about not giving up. We fight with our hearts, not just our claws or weapons. When you show a little confidence, a little courage, others notice. That's all there is to it." The queen studied him, trying to parse his words, trying to understand the strange, fearless creature before her. "You are unlike anything I have known," she admitted. "Most beings are predictable. They bow, they fear, they submit. You are unpredictable." "Predictable is boring," Elias said, "and boring gets you killed in my experience. Not that I'm suggesting you're boring, just predictable, maybe." Sarathis stared at him. She was not used to being challenged, not only by a prisoner, but by a species she had dismissed as weak. She felt an unfamiliar stir of curiosity, a thought that refused to be quieted. What if this human's way of thinking held some power she had never considered? The next few days were a dance of will and wit. Elias spoke to the queen, with playful irreverence, challenging her declarations, teasing her when she tried to intimidate him and never once showing fear. Each time he did, he subtly encouraged the other prisoners, making them more comfortable in his presence. One afternoon, a younger Zytharian approached him quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. How do you do it?" she asked. "I try to speak as you do, but I feel foolish." Elias smiled gently. "It's not about being foolish. It's about being honest, about believing in yourself even when everything tells you not to. Fear is natural. Courage is choice. Laughter, that's just the bonus." She blinked, uncertain but nodded. Others began to watch and learn, hesitating at first, then daring small acts of subtle defiance. A glance, a comment, a smile. Elias noticed each one and nodded, encouraging them, silently. The queen, ever watchful, noticed too. Her court whispered about it, some alarmed, others curious. Sarathis herself felt a mix of irritation and fascination. This human was changing something in her people, teaching them in small, unexpected ways. One evening she summoned him again, this time alone in a private chamber. Her expression was unreadable, though her posture betrayed tension. "You are teaching them ideas," she said quietly. "Ideas I do not wish them to have. Ideas of hope, of courage, of questioning authority." "Why?" Elias leaned against the wall, relaxed despite the chains. "Because it's what humans do. We survive by believing in something better, even when the odds are impossible. You've built your empire on fear, but even fear has cracks. All I do is show them the cracks. Sarathis considered him. Her claws flexed, tapping lightly against the floor. She had ruled for decades with certainty, with absolute command, and yet here was a creature who could unsettle not only her court, but her very assumptions about power. You are dangerous, she said finally, but I cannot yet decide what to do with you. Perhaps there is use for a creature like you. Elias grinned. Use me? I've been hoping for that, though I have to warn you I'm best used as a distraction. For the first time, Sarathis laughed. It was brief, almost hidden, but unmistakable. The sound echoed in the chamber, startling her guards. You are impossible, human, she said. Yet, perhaps in your impossibility you have value. As he was returned to his cell, Elias noticed a subtle change among the prisoners. They moved with less fear, whispered more openly, and dared small acts of defiance. His influence was spreading quietly, without weapons, without bloodshed, simply through courage, humor, and the power of example. That night, he lay on the cold stone floor and thought about the days to come. Change was slow, incremental, but it was beginning. And somewhere in the Queen's mind, he knew, a seed of doubt had been planted. She was questioning her assumptions, reconsidering her methods, and watching him with an intensity she could not hide. Elias smiled to himself. He was not free, not yet, but the first small victories were his. And if he could teach even a few prisoners to believe in something more than fear, then perhaps, just perhaps, he could change everything. And deep in the throne room, Sarathis sat awake long after her courtiers had left, thinking of the human who laughed in her face, who refused to bow, who inspired even the broken to dream. Something about him was dangerous. Something about him was alive. And for the first time in years, the Queen of the Zetherians felt uncertain. The tension in the Zetherian palace had grown palpable over the last few days. The whispers of rebellion among the prisoners were no longer soft or cautious. They had become confident murmurs, a ripple of hope spreading through the cells. Elias noticed it every time he was brought into the Queen's presence. The people around him moved differently now, more upright, more alert. They dared to look at him in admiration instead of fear. It was small, subtle, but enough to make a difference. Elias had learned to read these small signals like a map. Every shift in posture, every flicker of eye contact told him that his influence was working. It thrilled him in a way he had not expected. Even in chains, even in captivity, he was starting to change something larger than himself. That morning, as the two guards led him toward the throne room, he noticed the unusual activity in the hallways. Servants and soldiers moved in a flurry, whispering hurriedly, their eyes darting around as if searching for something or someone. When the doors to the throne room opened, a wave of unease swept over him. Something was wrong. Sarathis sat on her throne, more tense than usual. Her eyes were fixed on the entrance, scanning the hallways as if expecting trouble. Elias stepped forward, chains clinking, and offered his usual grin. "Good morning, Your Majesty. You look alert. Something exciting happening?" Sarathis did not respond immediately. She rose slowly, her massive form casting a shadow across the chamber. Her claws flexed unconsciously. "There has been an attempt on my life," she said finally, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Someone tried to kill me in the courtyard. The assassin was discovered, but it is clear, not all within my palace remain loyal." Elias felt a surge of adrenaline. Danger meant opportunity. He studied the Queen carefully, noting her tension, the quick movements of her guards and the flicker of unease behind her eyes. He knew instinctively that this situation could either end badly for him or give him the chance to prove his worth. "You need someone to help," he said lightly. "A guy like me, you know, human ingenuity and all that." Sarathis's gaze sharpened. "You would risk your life for me?" Elias shrugged. "I'm already here. Might as well make it interesting." Plus, I'd like to see the look on the assassin's face when a human, chained, underestimated, and apparently foolish, stops them. The queen's lips twitched, almost a smile, though she quickly suppressed it. "Very well," she said. "You will accompany my guards and ensure that the assassin is neutralized. But know this: failure will not be tolerated." Elias allowed himself a quiet chuckle. "Failure? That's not really my style." The corridor to the courtyard was tight and dark, with shadows stretching like long fingers across the walls. The guards flanked Elias, tense, their weapons ready. He kept his chains clinking softly, walking confidently, refusing to let fear take hold. When they arrived at the courtyard, the scene was chaotic. Servants and soldiers were gathering around, some injured, others shaken. At the center, a figure lurked near the edge of the walls, attempting to escape. The assassin was lithe and fast, but Elias noticed something his Zytherian companions did not: hesitation. The intruder was nervous, almost clumsy, betraying fear that Elias could exploit. "Hold them there," he whispered to the nearest guard. "I've got a plan." Before anyone could protest, Elias dropped to the ground, chains rattling, and rolled toward the assassin, narrowly avoiding a sharp blade. He grabbed a loose piece of stone from the floor and threw it, startling the intruder. The sudden movement caused the assassin to stumble just long enough for the guards to intervene. The fight was brief, but Elias's quick thinking turned what could have been disaster into triumph. The assassin was subdued, bound, and brought before the queen. Elias stood, chains clinking, brushing dust from his clothes, a faint grin on his face. "You're welcome," he said casually, happy to help. Sarathis studied him closely, her expression unreadable, and yet there was a shift in her eyes, a recognition of something more than luck or coincidence. He had acted decisively, thinking quickly under pressure, traits she respected, though she would not admit it aloud. "You are valuable," she said finally. "Not merely amusing, but useful. Perhaps there is more to you than I suspected." Elias tilted his head. "I told you. Humans have a few tricks: courage, brains, and a little audacity. Works every time." Over. The next few days, the palace was on high alert. Investigations were underway, suspects questioned, and the court buzzing with tension. The queen, however, seemed less severe with Elias than before. She called him to her chambers often, asking for his perspective, his advice, even if she did not always follow it. One afternoon, as he sat chained near her throne, she spoke again, her voice quieter than usual. "Why do you care about these people?" Elias looked around the throne room. Prisoners now walked with more confidence. Servants glanced at him with subtle smiles. Even some guards had begun to watch him with curiosity, rather than strict suspicion. "Because no one should live in fear all the time," he said simply. "Because hope matters. Because sometimes one person can make a difference, and maybe because I like seeing people grow a little stronger, even if it annoys the powerful." Sarathis's eyes lingered on him longer than usual. She had always ruled through fear and absolute authority. Yet here was a human teaching courage, spreading hope and changing the hearts of her people without threatening her throne directly. It was dangerous, unsettling, and fascinating all at once. "You are difficult to ignore," she admitted. "And yet, I find myself wondering what your presence truly means." Elias leaned back, chains clinking softly. "It means I'm here to make life interesting, and to prove a point. Fear is temporary, courage lasts." The queen studied him, her expression softening slightly, though her pride would never allow her to show it openly. For the first time, she considered that perhaps the human was not just amusing, not just bold, but genuinely remarkable, and that, thought once planted, refused to leave her mind. That night, Elias returned to his cell, exhausted but exhilarated. He had faced danger directly, protected the queen, and influenced the people around him. Even in captivity, he felt a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. The prisoners whispered quietly, their eyes wide with admiration. He had shown them that courage, wit, and quick thinking could make a difference, even in the most desperate situations. Meanwhile, Sarathis could not sleep. She paced the halls of her private chambers, her mind replaying the events of the day. The human had risked his life for her, acted decisively under pressure, and reminded her that strength could come in forms she had never considered. For the first time in decades, she questioned her methods, her assumptions, and even her own heart. Days passed, and the tension in the palace eased slightly, though vigilance remained. Elias continued to interact with the prisoners and the queen, his influence growing subtly but steadily. He became a bridge, a reminder that courage, hope, and humor could inspire even the most oppressed. The queen, for her part, struggled with her thoughts. She had always believed that fear was the ultimate tool of power. Yet this human had shown her something different. She could not yet admit it fully, but a seed of change had been planted in her mind. One evening, as she watched Elias interact with the prisoners, she caught herself smiling faintly, not openly, not proudly, but just enough to surprise herself. The human was teaching her in ways she could not yet fully understand that leadership could be tempered with empathy, courage could inspire, and even a ruler could learn from a prisoner. Elias, unaware of the full impact he was having, grinned and joked with the prisoners, demonstrating small acts of bravery and kindness. Each moment reinforced the lesson he had come to teach. Strength was not only in power, but in heart, mind, and the courage to stand for what was right. And somewhere deep within the queen's mind, the human's influence grew, leaving her with a quiet, unsettling thought. Perhaps the very thing she had dismissed as weakness, human courage, humor, and empathy, was the greatest strength she had ever encountered.